Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer and welcome to Best Kept Plans. Today's video is going to be a 2023 reading recap. If you're interested in learning about my favorite books that I read in 2023 and some fun stats about my reading year, please stick around. I am immediately filming this video after filming my December 2023 reading recap. If you haven't seen that yet, I will definitely try to remember to link it up in the cards wherever those cards are. And if you did watch that video, then you'll know I am filming with other people in the house, so I'm using a mic to hopefully cut down on background volume. Hopefully the sound is okay. I'm also dealing with eternally dreary weather here where I live. So if the lighting is a little rough, I apologize, but I film with natural light. And yeah, I'm actually really excited to talk about my year of reading in 2023. I feel like I overall had a really good reading year, a better reading year than I was anticipating. I thought it would be fun to start out with some stats and just a little bit of background info about how my year in reading went. The first thing I wanted to comment on is the fact that I did successfully complete a few different reading challenges this year. I did have an Instagram challenge that I put together for myself. I read one book a month that was recommended to me by someone on Instagram, and some of these were really, really great reads for me. I definitely had several 4-star reads, 4.5-star reads, a couple of 5-star reads. I did have a DNF, 2 DNFs in my Instagram challenge, but again, I had some really great reads. I'm always so excited to do this challenge because my 5-star reads, The Rosie Project and A History of Wild Places, I don't know if I would have ever read them otherwise. Long Bright River is another one. That was another 5-star read for me. That was part of my Instagram challenge. I also did an A to Z challenge, and I didn't pick the books I was reading based off of letters that I needed for it. I was just curious to see how many I could fill in throughout the year, and we were only left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters that we didn't fill in. So most of the challenge was completed for the A to Z challenge. And then I did 2 specific genre challenges this year. I wanted to read a mystery thriller style book every month and then a book of poetry every month. And I am happy to say that I did complete both of those, which is really, really exciting. And then in terms of other stat related things, I read a lot more books than I thought I was going to read. If you watch my 2022 version of this video, I talk about how I read 100 books exactly and how in 2023 there was no way I was going to read 100 books. I didn't see myself reading that many, and I somehow shockingly read 156 books this year. I don't know how. Definitely very surprising to me. That translates to 55,708 pages read. My top 5 genres of the year were romance at number 1, mystery thriller at number 2, general fiction, contemporary fiction, literary fiction, women's fiction, all of that kind of combined at number 3. Number 4 was fantasy, and number 5 was poetry. My average rating for books this year was 3.6 out of 5 stars, which I think is pretty good. Honestly, I feel like I'm becoming a harsher rater as time goes on, and I foresee myself having a lower average rating next year for sure. I also had 22 5-star reads, which is really interesting because I actually had 22 5-star reads last year as well. And again, I feel like I'm a much harsher rater now than I was last year. I do have my reading journal here. This is my Archer and Olive Amy Tangerine reading journal. I keep track of all of the books that I read in here, all of my challenges, all that fun stuff. I love this reading journal. I am so happy that I use a reading journal. It's a great creative outlet for me, and I can't wait to continue with this in 2024. I am going to turn to my book bracket. I'm not going to show it to you all, but I am going to turn to my book bracket because what I do in order to come up with my favorite book of the year is I pick a favorite book every month, and then 2 months go head to head. That brings me down to a top 6. Those go head to head, brings me down to a top 3, and then we have my best favorite book of the year. So we're going to dive into talking about each of my favorite books of the month, and I'll talk about other 5-star reads that were in that month as well. Okay, so for January 2023, I actually don't have the reading journal for the first half of the year, so some of this is going to be based off my memory and I could be a little off. But I believe I had 2 5-star reads: The Magic of Lemon Drop Pie by Rachel Linden, and then Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. And my favorite book that I read in January ended up being Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I did receive this as a digital ARC. I liked it so much I ended up purchasing a physical copy, which I don't have right now because I let my sister borrow it. But I absolutely love this story. This was my first Abby Jimenez book that I read, and I fell in love with her writing. I thought the anxiety representation in this book was wonderful. I loved the male main character. I loved the relationship that our male and female main characters had. It, to me, was just a really, really wonderful romance. So that was my favorite book of January. For February, I believe I read Carrie Soto Is Back in February. That was a 5-star read for me. Once Upon a Tome, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller by Oliver Darkshire was a 5-star read. And I think it was just those 2. And of those 2, my favorite book that I read in February 2023 was Once Upon a Tome, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller by Oliver Darkshire. I did receive this as an ARC on NetGalley. I requested it thinking that it was fiction, and then realized as I was reading it that it is nonfiction, and I am not a fan of nonfiction. I have a really hard time with nonfiction, but let me tell you, this book is so enjoyable. I liked it so much I went and bought a physical copy, and look at how pretty that physical copy is. I feel like this is almost like a collection of essays, a collection of little short stories. They're so fun and unique. The author has such an interesting and creative perspective. I loved everything about this. I kept talking about this book to anyone who would listen to me throughout the year. And yeah, this was definitely my favorite book that I read in February. Next, for March, I had a really good reading month, and I had several 5-star reads. The first of which was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, then The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley, and then I think I did read Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez in March, though it could have been April, I'm not 100% sure. But of the 5-star reads that I had in March, my favorite ended up being The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley. I do not have a physical copy of this, but I really do feel like I want it because I really love this book. I thought about it long after I finished reading it. It is a story of college friends that are now decades removed. Adults have gone through their own thing, have dealt with loss, have dealt with tragedy, have dealt with so many different things, and them being a found family for each other, and them coming together and spending time with each other, going through a really tough situation. I absolutely loved this book. It made me laugh, it made me cry. I highly, highly recommend it. Definitely my favorite read of March 2023. For April, I read Hello Stranger by Catherine Center and Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. But my favorite book that I read in April ended up being Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. This was an ARC that I received through NetGalley. I liked it so much I got the physical copy. I found this story to be so unique and interesting, and I just loved our male main characters. And if you read this book, you'll know why I'm saying that way. I loved our female main character. I found that her struggle was pretty unique and interesting, but also something that a lot of people deal with on a day-to-day basis. I just love this. I don't know, I just love this so, so much, and it definitely was my favorite book that I read in April. For May, I had a 5-star read of A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. I think that was my only 5-star read that month, but I could be wrong. And I did pick that as my favorite book that I read in May. That was my Instagram challenge book for May. So happy that this was recommended and that I read this because I absolutely loved it. It was super, super interesting. The twist was bananas, and I actually figured it out, but it didn't take away from the book for me. I still absolutely loved it. So really, really great read. In June 2023, I definitely had a few different five-star reads. I think I read The Only One Left by Riley Sager in June. I read A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals, The Rosie Project, and I'm going to say this name wrong, Grimet Simsian. Definitely a few really, really good five-star reads, and my favorite of those ended up being A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals. I got this as a digital ARC. I liked it so much that I got a physical copy, and I was able to get one with these really, really cool sprayed edges on it. I really, really love this. I was very nervous to read this because it definitely seemed Regency era based on the cover and the title, and I don't necessarily do well with that style language, but I just thought it would be such a fun and interesting read and a way to kind of step outside of my box, and I was not wrong. This was so much fun. I laughed a bunch. I really loved our female main character. I loved the way that the story kind of evolved, and I really, really hope that this author writes more. I really, really hope that this becomes a series actually, because I think it would be a really great series. So yeah, definitely my favorite book that I read in June. And then in July, I had Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros as a five-star, as well as Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross as a five-star. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros did win out. So this was the most challenging month to pick my favorite five-star read. It definitely, definitely was, because I love both of those books so much. But Fourth Wing, I don't know, it just beat it out. It beat it out by a little bit. And I love this story. I found this story to be incredibly immersive. I really enjoyed the college setting. I liked the friend group. I liked the romance. I liked the background story of what was going on in this world. And it's a series that I'm super excited to have found and can't wait to continue with. Next, we have my favorite book that I read in August. And for August, I had Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home and Daisy Hates The Great Undoing as my two five-star reads, which, let me tell you, when I decided to get into the Magnolia Parks universe, I was not anticipating that these were going to be some five-star reads for me, but two of them were. And my favorite book that I ended up reading in August was Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home. This book just did something to me. It made reading the first Magnolia Parks book completely worth it. It built upon everything that Daisy Hates puts into play. It made me fall in love with these characters. It made my heart be torn to shreds by these characters. I just really, really love this. I think the writing in here is super interesting and intriguing, and it just reveals so much about these characters and makes you feel so much for them, and I love this book. The next month that we're going to talk about is September, and I actually had no five-star reads in September. My only month of the year that I had no five-star reads, and so my highest rated book of September was Things We Left Behind by Lucy Score. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I know a lot of people didn't like this. A lot of people were unhappy with this one or let down by this, but I enjoyed it. I love Lucian. I love Sloane. I liked their relationship. Do I wish they would have just gotten on the same page a little bit sooner? Yeah, I do. But I really thoroughly enjoyed this. Gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And so it was my highest rated book of September. So it made my book bracket. And then for October, I only had one five-star read, and that was Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This was another one of my Instagram challenge books this year. This is a chunker. The writing in here is so tiny. I was so worried about getting through this, and let me tell you, reading this flew by. I was so thoroughly entertained by this book. I was so invested. I love the characters so much. I just love this, and it's such interesting subject matter, difficult subject matter, but interesting subject matter, and I highly recommend this to anybody. In November 2023, I only had one five-star read, and that was Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I picked this up the day it came out, started reading it right away, tabbed the absolute heck out of it. I know a lot of people did not like this, and I've seen this on a lot of people's most disappointing list of books that they read in 2023. And I understand why. I definitely think some of the criticisms I've heard of this book are very valid, but I still loved it. and it makes me want to continue on with the series even more. So this was my favorite book of November. And then for December 2023, I did have 3 5-star reads. Those were Reckless by Elsie Silver, Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver, and then Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. And my favorite book that I read in December ended up being Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. Definitely a hard month to pick my favorite book for sure, but there's just something about this couple in here and the way that the romance is told and dealt with in Divine Rivals and Ruthless Vows that made me have to pick this book as my favorite for December 2023. So now that we've gone through all of the 12 books that I picked as my favorite books for each month of the year, we are going to go through the head-to-heads. So I'm going to rearrange my books a little bit and we'll be right back. We're going to do head-to-heads. So I'm basically going to go between 2 months and pick my favorite of those 2 books. So the first 2 head-to-heads are going to be January, which was Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, and then February, which was Once Upon a Tome, The Misadventures of a Rare Bookseller by Oliver Darkshire. And Once Upon a Tome is going to win on that one. As much as I loved Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, there was just something about this book that really captivated me. So this one made it into the second round of my book bracket. Next we have March and April. So for March, we had The Celebrants by Stephen Rowley, and then for April, we had Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. And Catherine Center, Hello Stranger, is going to win out over The Celebrants. Again, there's just something about this book, like it was the right book at the right time. It just hit all the right places in my brain, and so this moves on to the second round of my book bracket. Next we have May versus June. For May, we had A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. Sorry about that. And for June, we have A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals, and A Most Agreeable Murder ends up winning out. I just think this is such a fun and interesting story. I love the writing in here, I love the humor in here, and this one moves on to the second round of my book bracket. Next, we have July and August, and for July, we have Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and for August we have Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings. This was definitely the most challenging of the first round into second round choices. I love both of these books so much, and these are both probably in my top 5 books that I read this year. So this was definitely a really hard choice, but Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings really had to take the cake because of the emotional investment that I had in these characters. So this is moving on to round 2 of my book bracket. Next, we have September and October. So for September, we have my only non-5-star read, which is Things We Left Behind by Lucy Score, and then Long Bright River by Liz Moore. And obviously, with Things We Left Behind not being rated 5 stars, Long Bright River is what's going to move on to the second round of my book bracket. And then we have November and December. So November is going to be Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, and then December is going to be Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. And actually, to me, this really wasn't a very difficult decision. Ruthless Vows, hands down, is definitely my favorite out of those 2 and moves on to round 2 of my book bracket. So now we have my final 6 books, and like I said last year when I made this video, these are not my favorite 6 books that I read this year. That's just not the way it works in the book bracket. So these are not my favorite 6 books that I read this year. Divine Rivals didn't even make it onto my book bracket, and that is probably in my top 10 of books that I read this year. So it's just what books I read in what month and how that works out. But we have my top 6 right here. I have physical copies of all of them, which is pretty cool. And so we're going to go into a head-to-head to find out my top 3. The first 2 head-to-heads are Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire and Hello Stranger by Catherine Center, and no one is more surprised than me that I am going to move along Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire. Again, this book, I just loved it so much. I had such a good time reading about it. I still think about it all the time, and I read it in February. So this is moving on to round 3 of my book bracket. And then the next 2 books that are going head to head are going to be A Most Agreeable Murder by Julia Seals and Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings. And I definitely knew which one I was going to move along to the next round, and that was Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings. And then the last of our second round is going to be Long Bright River by Liz Moore and Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. And for me, I had to give it to Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This was probably the most challenging of my second round head-to-heads because I really, really loved Long Bright River. But again, something about this story, something about this couple, I just really, really love. And so my round 3 books are Once Upon a Tome, Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home, and Ruthless Vows. This was challenging for sure. I did not think this was going to be my top 3 in my book bracket. A nonfiction pick in my top 3 was definitely very, very surprising. And even Magnolia Parks being in here was super surprising. But of these 3 books, I had to choose my favorite book of the year as Magnolia Parks: The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings. The surprise that I have that this is my favorite book of the year, genuinely, I am so surprised, especially after reading the first book in the series. Now, I rated that book, I think, 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't dislike it. I knew what I was going into when I read it. I knew it was a toxic couple. I knew it was miscommunication to the max. But the fact that we got from there to me loving this book so much that I think about it multiple times a week, that I want to listen to songs that remind me of it, that I constantly think about what's going to happen next. Words cannot describe how much I ended up loving this book, and it genuinely is my favorite book that I read in 2023. There is just something about this book. There is just something about it, and I feel like reading the whole series, getting through the first book is so worth it to get to this story. My favorite book of the year. I can't believe it. Now that we have talked about my favorite book of 2023, I just want to look ahead to 2024 and talk about a couple of goals that I have. Number 1, my reading goal in terms of number of books for 2024 is going to be 75. Again, I don't see myself reading more books in 2024 than I read in 2023, that's for sure. It would be great if I could hit 100 books in 2024, but also I don't know that that's going to be possible either. And a big reason why I don't know if that's going to be possible is because I really want to dive into fantasy more. That's another one of my goals for 2024. I have really loved getting back into fantasy. I want to continue with that, and fantasy books tend to be really long. So I have a feeling that I'm going to read more fantasy, and because of that, I'm going to read less books overall, and I'm totally fine with that. And then another one of my goals or things that I really, really want to push towards in 2024 is reading more nonfiction. Seeing that one of my favorite books of the year was this book right here, Once Upon a Tome, a nonfiction book, makes me want to read more nonfiction. I think I know what I like out of nonfiction now, and I think if I lean into that, I could really end up enjoying nonfiction throughout this new year of 2024. So those are a couple of reading goals or reading related goals that I have for myself for 2024. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. If you have read any of the books that were in my top 12, please let me know your spoiler-free thoughts down below. And as always, everyone, please be safe. Bye-bye.